Hello and welcome to this short presentation on automated DDoS mitigations and other cybersecurity innovations. We are reminded on an almost daily basis nowadays, either via the news or more often than not through disruption to our own personal lives, as to the ever-increasing number of data breaches and issues around service downtime, and of both the initial damage and long-term impact caused to big brands and even worse to their customers and end users. Now, these can of course be attributed to any number of possible security failures, but one of the oldest is showing that it not only still has teeth, but can compete with the best. And that is of course the distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS as it's more commonly known. My name is Richard Morley and I run a team of consultants here at Safenames, and I will be joined in a moment by Vivek Ganti from the product marketing team at Cloudflare, who will be sharing with us some of the very latest insights into modern DDoS attacks and how best to mitigate these threats moving forward. Cloudflare is a company Safenames is proud to have worked alongside for many years, during which time we have grown to become one of their largest partners. Now, whilst of course Cloudflare needs no introduction, for those of you not already familiar with Safenames, we are a leading corporate domain name registrar based in the UK, and for over 20 years we have been providing enterprise-level domain management services to large global multinationals and household names such as Sony, Dell, GlaxoSmithKline, EY, and have for some time now been the popular choice for many platforms, operators and networks within the fast-growing affiliate space, with strongholds in the gambling, dating and adult verticals. In addition to centralized domain and SSL management, we are also widely recognized for our online brand protection, legal services, and bespoke enterprise hosting solutions. As with most businesses, over the years, we have added to our own core services through strategic partnerships with Dyn and Newstar for premium DNS, and of course, Cloudflare on the cybersecurity front. The modern threat landscape is a fast-changing dynamic environment and is certainly a far cry from the first ever officially recorded DDoS attack way back in '99, when just 114 computers were infected and used to simultaneously flood requests into a single workstation at the University of Minnesota, and this lasted for 2 days. Fast forward to now, and compare that with June of this year, when Cloudflare successfully detected and mitigated a packet-based volumetric attack lasting 4 days, peaking at around 700 packets per second and involved over 300,000 IPs. Back then, of course, universities were obvious targets, with attackers no doubt seeking to access cutting-edge research papers in the fields of science, medicine and engineering, or maybe for some young coding students, just the ability to be able to change their grades. But since then, we have seen the internet emerge into its modern form, and along with it, an exponential growth in not only the number of potential targets, but also the frequency, size, duration, and complexity of such attacks. Nowadays, commonly utilizing multiple vectors of attack in an attempt to overwhelm a business's traditional legacy defenses, many of which are now no longer capable of fending off such attacks. Today, it is my pleasure to be joined by Vivek Ganti from Cloudflare's product marketing team. He will be letting us in on some of the new innovations around securing against these evolved types of DDoS attacks. And we will also be learning how to automatically mitigate even the largest of volumetric DDoS attacks, and whether it is now possible to mitigate in under 10 seconds. Vivek, over to you.
Thanks so much, Richard. Thanks for that introduction. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's begin with the slide. It's one of my favorite slides. It's a visual representation of Cloudflare's network's scale and breadth. Cloudflare has a physical presence in over 200 cities across 100+ countries, and are less than 100 milliseconds away from 99% of the world's internet-connected population. So for context, the blink of an eye is 300 to 400 milliseconds. And we didn't build this large network maniacally for no reason. We want to help upgrade the internet in many ways. We want to make it faster. We want to make it more secure for everyone. And part of making the network faster is actually being everywhere. It's being physically everywhere. And every data center we bring online in a new region has measurable significance to our customers, because our company's mission is bold but simple. It's to help build a better internet. And that means building a faster, more secure, more reliable internet for everyone. And to achieve on that mission, it's important that we are physically proximal to not just our customers' data centers, but also their end users, so we can deliver the traffic in the fastest way possible on Earth, or even stop threats on the edge of any size or kind way before they reach our customers' networks. So let's move on to the next slide, which is also one of my favorite slides. This is a different kind of map. To give you an idea of the attacks that we see on Cloudflare's network, this is a visual representation of that. On average, we block about 72 billion with a B cyber threats each day. When we talk about the scale of Cloudflare, it's sometimes hard for people to understand what it means to operate at Cloudflare scale. And this snapshot that you see here is roughly about 30 minutes worth of attacks on an average day in the last quarter, Q2 of 2020. So this map adds visibility to the changing face of attacks. Of course, you see the huge headline-making volumetric attacks with high request volumes, so the big orange circles. But you also see the smaller, sneakier attacks that are on the rise with lower request rates, and I'll talk about that in just a few slides. And they may not feel huge on this map, but if that's your origin server, if that's your network, that really hurts. The good news is that we've got all of them covered. We learn from these attacks, and each and every one of these 72 billion attacks strengthens our security solutions by improving our threat intelligence. So it's almost like we're a giant immune system for the internet, one that's getting stronger with every attack that we notice on our network. So now moving on to attack trends onto the next slides. Let's look at some global attack trends that we're seeing over the past quarter over Cloudflare's network. On this slide, what you're seeing is that we notice that the total number of global L3, L4 attacks, that is the network layer DDoS attacks, that we detected and mitigated, doubled quarter over quarter. So if you saw 100 attacks in Q1, we saw double of that in Q2. We reported a spike in attacks even in Q1, and we're continuing to see this trend accelerate through Q2. Over 66% of all DDoS attacks globally that we saw in 2020 occurred in the very second quarter. And if you dig in deeper, we noticed that May was the busiest month in the first half of 2020, followed by June and April. In fact, 63% of all the network layer DDoS attacks that peaked over 100 gigabits per second occurred in May itself. And that's not surprising, because as the global pandemic continued to heighten around the world in May, attackers were especially eager to take down websites and other internet properties. Moving on to the next slide, now let's look at the duration itself. How long did these attacks last? You might think that a lot of these attacks lasted days, if not weeks, but that's actually not true. The general trend in the industry we're seeing is that the attacks are actually not that long. About 83% of the attacks lasted 30 to 60 minutes. And we saw a similar trend like that in Q1 also, where about 79% of the attacks fell in the same duration range. Now, this might seem like a small or a short duration, but imagine that this is a 30 to 60 minute cyber battle between your security team and the attackers. Now, it doesn't seem so short, does it? Additionally, if a DDoS attack creates an outage or a service degradation, the recovery time to reboot your appliances and relaunch your services can be much longer, costing you lost revenue and reputation for every minute. Now, how big, what's the size of these attacks? Moving on to the next slide, let's look at that. We noticed in Q2 that majority of the network layer DDoS attacks were relatively small. And when I say small, they were small with regards to the scale of Cloudflare's network. In Q2, nearly 90% of all network layer DDoS attacks that we saw peaked below 10 gigabits per second. Small attacks that peak below 10 gigabits per second can still easily cause an outage to most of the websites and most of the internet properties around the world if they're not protected by a cloud-based DDoS mitigation service. And even from a packet rate perspective, about 76% of all network layer DDoS attacks peaked under 1 million packets per second. Now, typically a gigabits per second Ethernet interface can deliver anywhere between 80,000 to maybe 1.5 million packets per second. And assuming the interface also serves legitimate traffic, and that most organizations often even have much less than a 1 gigabits per second interface, you can see how even these quote unquote small packet rate DDoS attacks can easily take down internet properties. If we're seeing that the number of smaller attacks are getting bigger, we're also noticing that the big attacks are getting bigger. And we'll see that on the next slide. we noticed that this quarter, we saw an increasing number of large-scale attacks, both in terms of packet rate and bit rate. In fact, 88% of all DDoS attacks in 2020 that peaked over 100 gigabits per second were actually launched after shelter-in-place went into effect in March. And we don't think that's a coincidence. We think that there's more and more people who have more time on their hands and are launching attacks, these DDoS campaigns against internet properties. And digging in deeper, once again, May was not just the busiest month with the most number of attacks, but also the greatest number of large attacks, over 100 gigabits per second. And from the packet rate perspective, June took the lead with a whopping 754 million packets per second attack. Besides that attack, the maximum packet rate stayed mostly consistent throughout the quarter with about 200 million packets per second. And this particular attack, the 754 million packets per second one, was what actually automatically detected and mitigated by Cloudflare. It was against one of our customers, and it was an attack that was an organized 4-day campaign that lasted towards the end of June, like between June 18th and the 21st. And as a part of this campaign, the attack traffic from over 316,000 IP addresses targeted a single Cloudflare IP address. Of course, that was nothing in compared to Cloudflare's breadth and scale that I showed on the very first slide, so our customers didn't even notice the attack. Moving on to the next slide, let's look at what attack vectors were actually used in a lot of these attacks. If you're not aware, an attack vector is a term used to describe the attack method. It might be a protocol attack or any other kind of attack. In Q2, we observed an increasing number of vectors used by attackers. A total of 39 different types of attack vectors were used, and SYN floods dominated the majority with about 57% in share, followed by reset attacks and then UDP and CLDAP. So what are SYN flood attacks? A very quick overview of that. SYN floods attacks aim to exploit the handshake process of a TCP connection. By repeatedly sending initial connection request packets with a synchronized flag, the attacker attempts to overwhelm the router's connection table that tracks the state of the TCP connections. The router replies with a packet that contains a synchronized acknowledgement flag, also called SYNAC, allocates a certain amount of memory for each given connection, and falsely waits for the client to respond with a final acknowledgement packet, which never happens, of course, because it's not a legitimate packet in the first place. And given a sufficient number of SYNs that occupy the router's memory, the router is now unable to allocate any further memory for legitimate clients, which causes a denial of service. And more SYN floods are becoming very common and actually even harder to detect. Now, moving on to the next slide, let's look at where we're seeing a lot of these attacks. Now, globally, we saw on our network that the United States had the most number of attacks. But diving in deeper into APAC specifically, we saw that our customers in Thailand and Japan were targeted with the most number of attacks in APAC, closely followed by India and Australia. So that's an interesting trend we're following too. So these were the very high-level trends that we've seen on our network. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me at vivek@cloudflare.com. And now I'll give you a very high-level overview of what Cloudflare's DDoS mitigation is and what our innovative approach is and how we compare to other vendors in the industry. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see that as opposed to one of the biggest differentiators of Cloudflare is that we run every service on every server, on every rack, in every data center across our entire network. So Richard, if you click on the next slide, this slide builds up. This architecture is what allows us to deliver new features very quickly, and we don't have to worry about which part of architecture or which piece of software is running on which part of our network. This allows us to scale very quickly. But to make this more real in terms of DDoS mitigation, as opposed to legacy scrubbing providers, we don't have a limited subset of a scrubbing center network that we have to divert attack traffic to. In fact, each and every one of our data centers is able to mitigate L3 to L7 attacks independently and at scale, along with all of the other products that we offer, such as CDN, web application firewall, DNS, bot management, serverless edge compute, and much more. And this is really the core of what our network is built on. So if you know us for any of the security, performance, or reliability products that we offer, it runs on every single server in every rack in each one of these data centers across the 200 cities that you just saw on the slide. Moving on to the next slide, I think it's important to double click on how we are different from other DDoS mitigation vendors. There's a few other cloud-based DDoS mitigation vendors, but when they want to service your traffic for DDoS mitigation, they first send all of your traffic to a scrubbing center, which might be very distant from where the source of your traffic might be. It's first sent over there, and then filtered traffic is then sent for any L7, which is the layer 7 or application layer processing, to another cloud. And this additional hop often adds latency, which is just not acceptable for a lot of applications. And then all that clean traffic is sent back to the customer's data center. Now compare this with Cloudflare's approach, which you'll see on the next slide. On this slide, you'll see that Cloudflare, because we run the full stack of services on our network in every single data center, we don't have to reroute all of your traffic to a different data center. We can process all of your traffic on the same data center. So imagine that you have traffic which might comprise of ICMP traffic, or you might have a lot of web traffic. If there's any traffic which can benefit from L7 processing, then we automatically upgrade it to our L7 pipeline within the same data center. So if there's any content caching, if there's any web application firewall policies that need to be applied, we can do that on the same data center. This saves on latency. The other differentiator is that because of our global physical presence and proximity to applications and the end users, we're able to do all of this processing at a data center that's closest to the client. And that means that we are also very fast, because once it hits the Cloudflare data center, we route your traffic over the fastest ways possible on the earth. So how do we actually compare numbers-wise with other vendors? You'll see that in the next slide. Magic Transit is our DDoS protection solution for entire networks. It's a product that we have been using internally at Cloudflare for the last few years to protect our own data centers, and we actually productized it, making it available to all of our customers just over a year back. The way it works is Magic Transit works by announcing our customers' routes via Border Gateway Protocol, BGP, ingesting traffic to our closest data centers, inspecting for threats, and then sending clean traffic back to the customer over secure GRE tunnels or a dedicated direct connection. What's differentiating about Cloudflare is, again, our network, more specifically our mitigation capacity for network infrastructure. Our DDoS mitigation capacity for networks is higher than the next 4 competitors combined. As I mentioned earlier, we're able to do this because every single data center we have is a scrubbing center. Also, our time to mitigation is currently under 10 seconds globally, and we can detect threats very, very quickly, often even under 3 seconds, because of what we know over our network, and mitigate attacks globally very quickly. Moving on to the next slide. All of us know Wikipedia. It's one of the most visited websites in the world with over 25 billion monthly page views. They experienced a massive DDoS attack in early September of 2019. And we reached out to them to see how we can help. And within a few hours, we were able to bring them back online because of Magic Transit. Not only were they able to restore their global service to Wikipedia, to all of their users, but also the imposed latency was very, very minimal. Before Cloudflare, it was 66 milliseconds, and I think after Cloudflare Magic Transit was onboarded, before Cloudflare was onboarded, it was 63 milliseconds, and after we onboarded them with Cloudflare, there was only a difference of about 3 milliseconds to 66, which is incredible, and we're only able to do this combination of robust security with fast performance because of our global network. And Wikipedia has since deployed Magic Transit as a core part of their network infrastructure, and they leverage us to our entire threat intelligence that Cloudflare offers to help mitigate any attacks even in the future since 2019 of September. I was talking to their CTO and they told us that they really liked working with our team. And that's also very evident, not just by talking to customers, but also talking to some industry analysts. So when you move on to the next slide, you'll see that our DDoS mitigation product is very well recognized in the industry. The first is Gartner. We got the most number of high ratings in a study that they recently conducted. There's Forrester. We were leader in the IDC MarketScape in 2019, and also by IDC. There's a typo here on the slide. It should be Forrester, but also we were leader on declared by IDC. So we are a recognized product in the industry. We do care about our customers a lot, and if you want a solution that provides you robust security with integrated performance, then Cloudflare is your choice. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Vivek, for that very useful insight into some of the new threats that we face today, and also reminding us how Cloudflare continues to be at the very forefront in bringing out these new and innovative products and services specifically designed to mitigate constantly evolving attacks. Last year, the US Department of Homeland Security stated that the recorded size of attacks over the previous 5 years had increased by a factor of 10, and flagged their concerns as to whether current network infrastructure would be able to cope if this explosive rate of growth were to continue. This could explain why a recent study revealed that 60% of SOC employees were considering leaving their jobs or switching careers entirely following increased pressures at work. The unprecedented events of this year have only accelerated what was already a growing need for businesses to overhaul their often dated legacy systems in order to try and cope with the increased demand and constantly changing cyber threat landscape. More and more now, we are seeing businesses actively seeking solutions capable of centralizing their multiple existing cybersec needs under that single vendor with the single pane of glass approach that you find with Cloudflare. If you would like to find out more about how both Cloudflare and Safenames can help protect your online presence more effectively, then please visit us at our virtual booth, where we will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Please note that there are no booth numbers, so I imagine that you just have to search for Safenames. Alternatively, you can reach us at sales@safenames.net or book a meeting with us using the conference scheduling app. Thank you once again for watching.